Okay, we're starting up here. I've got my full screen RJ's Evolution Hour logo up here, and I'll leave it hanging for I begin to get started on everything. This was a rather slow going because I just got back from Seattle over Thanksgiving vacation, and which is the reason why there wasn't a Evolution Hour last week. Okay, we'll stop sharing there. Proceed with the exciting world of me talking about stuff. This topic kind of stumbled on abruptly because of the work that I was researching for keeping up with proceedings at the National Academy of Sciences and incoming papers. And one of them, that was a full-text paper, was on three-dimensional visualization and a deep learning model reveal complex fungal parasite networks in behaviorally manipulated ants. Gee. That actually is about this particular breed of ant that's got these. In fact, there's apparently other ants that have similar kinds of things with different parasites, but there's a little fungal parasite in there that makes it go and climb up plants and chomp down on the little leaf, making a perfect environment. It won't let go for the fungus that's inside the ant to spread out and expand. So it basically takes over the ant as a little slave. And it's really creepy and weird, isn't it? It turns out this new study is really interesting because it doesn't involve the brain. At no point, apparently, does this fungus ever invade the ant brain. It does it all through muscles and various stuff that it secretes that triggers off cascades of stuff, and they're just starting to do the research on it. It's really quite neat, and it's all open access, so anybody can read it. And it's subtle. I woke up this morning. I'd already put out a blurb where when I was putting this into my bibliography yesterday after I got back from Seattle, I was on Twitter and I thought, this is a neat little paper. I'll throw a little gauntlet out. And so I put a link to it up and asked a bunch of creationists who I follow on Twitter, do you think this was designed, and do you think it's kind of creepy? And if that's true, doesn't that mean the designer is do creepy things? So I put in Douglas Axe and Kent Hovind and Eric Hovind and Ken Ham and Fazal Rana and Hugh Ross. And to my surprise, later on, Douglas Axe, the intelligent design guy, conceded that, yeah, it did look kind of creepy. But he would read the paper and he would comment on it later. So he was the one who actually kind of bit on the issue. Now, the reason why I brought all this up, oh, look over and see all the people there. Hi, BJ, and Paranor was in there. We should probably have a little side discussion about that delicious discussion that was going on internet, but we'll do that a little bit later on in the show, maybe. Anyway, why I decided to do this as this evolution hour was it suddenly dawned on me when I woke up this morning that this is actually an interesting little gauntlet test. Speciation is one for all anti-evolutionists, but young earth creationists are the ones that really have to deal with that problem because of the need to keep the kinds down on Noah's Ark. But this issue of what I would classify as a theodicy problem, is their design that's creepy, falls right in the ballpark of intelligent design. And so if they actually had a working model, which they don't, about how design is supposed to work, how you really identify and apply design theory in real places, this should be explainable in some way. They should be able to tell us which of this stuff is designed, which, if any, is naturally evolved in these little fungi-ant relationships and all the stuff, and then also make a measurement, because we live in a moral universe, of whether or not this is kind of creepy. And was it designed to be creepy? And when was this designed? Recently or not? Is the designer, stopping making bacterial flagella and nebula, and now solely devoted to making creepy stuff, making ants go up to spread fungi? So that's the fun little issue on that, and I'll see whether or not Douglas Axe gets back into it. But what it means is that I'm gradually building up a series of handy bricks that you can use to lob at people. I'll check over here on the live chat here. Immutable Destiny says, where does the term kind fit in on a taxonomic system? Is it a family or class or order of species? Oh, very good question, Immutable. And the answer is all of the above and none of the above. that if you look at grassroots creationists, your Kent Hovind types, they really think that kinds are species, and they have to have a kind as a species for human beings. This is not a if and or but thing. They got to have that. So, but the more taxonomically sophisticated ones, and the baraminologists, and I've done videos and stuff on that before, you can hunt around on the channel. I think Jackson Wheat and I did a little thing on baraminology a ways back. That the traditional kind is a family, but when you look at how enormously diverse life is, they've got to kind of bounce all over the field, from orders to sometimes phyla in some cases, so it's literally bouncing all over the field. There is no consistency to it. That's kind of what they want to get rid of, and how much data they want to flush down the screen. So I hope that answers your question, Immutable. The short answer is they haven't worked that out. They don't really know what a kind is rigorously, in the way that a species or genera is quite rigorously done. And the reason why it all shows evolution is because at that species genus level, you can see where things are kind of squishy, and you can find instances of something where in a fossil record, is it this species or that species? Well, that's because they're transitional. They're not quite. They're in the process of becoming one or the other. And so bit by bit, you can start ferreting out more and more about the genealogical relationships, and apply enough of that, you can work out a heck of a lot, which of course the anti-evolutionists don't do. So back to my main point about Brixtolob. Evolution slam dunk on the reptile-mammal transition is an obvious one of those. Any kind of issue like the speciation issue or this theodicy issue, I think I go into quite a bit of theodicy. I didn't put a link in it on the video, but anybody can go around, because if you haven't got my damn website on power dial by now, I mean, why not? I'll put the link in here just so everybody can see. Everybody pay attention. www.tuco.wordpress.com. Oh, I did put the thing in the thing. I did put in that. I was on a rush today trying to get everything organized for today. But anyway, the intelligent design chapter, Creationism Light, in the old tip tab at the main website, went into this a lot, because the theodicy is the idea, why does God allow, or the designer allow, nasty things to happen? And there's just a ton of that in biology. There's a whole bunch of diseases and difficulties that are things that are all built upon biology doing its thing. And to the extent that intelligent designers need to pay attention to this issue, they don't. They don't really like this much, because it calls into question the potential motives of the designer. And I describe it as the Titanic iceberg problem that you can go into. So I hope more people will be reading all of that stuff and following it up. So this I thought, this paper on fungi and ants, the paper has a bit of a summary of some of the other ones, the toxoplasma case and others they allude to in the beginning of the paper. So if you don't know anything about the weird stuff of fungi and how they do manipulate organisms, you can get a little bit of a lineup on that. I think Parasite Rex, the book that Carl Zimmer wrote, also went into a lot of that stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff out there that you can get either online or at your library or whatever to follow up on that. And the main thing is there are these weird cases of where various parasites will be not just living inside of the thing, but actually manipulating the behavior of the organism to serve itself. I alluded to another ant case where this one, I think it was a fungi, that turns the back end of the ant into, it's a black ant, and it makes its back end turn red and become easily detached, so that it is resembling a berry that these birds eat, which are their main area that they host in. And so they're transforming the ant into a target zone so that the parasite can be taken in on this pretend berry and now live in the bird that's actually eating it. Now that stuff is just plain weird, and it's understandable from a natural evolution perspective that doesn't give a rat's ass about that. It's just whatever works. But from a design perspective, wow, what kind of oddball designer would be doing stuff like that? It's kind of okay. Let's see what we got going on here. BJ says about the try the Guardian for golden jackal, a new wolf species hiding in plain sight. They did a great write-up with links to reports that aren't behind paywalls. Yeah, this all of the biological world, if you look at the details, on speciation, you'll see hybridization zones. I think something like half of all duck species are capable of hybridization, for example. Plants do it in a different way. I touched upon some of this stuff in a previous evolution hour on the speciation issue. And the thing is that if you start looking at the details, you see these squishy zones where species start breaking down and you can't tell which one's which. And you can also see by the total anatomy and the biology and the genetics what's related to what and what's coming about on what. And there really shouldn't be these squishy zones if natural branching evolution isn't happening. You really would expect these immutable kinds, and that's the theory behind baraminology. They think if they plot all the data that they steal from the actual cladistic analyses, that they can see these big divides where there'll be a blob over here and a blob over there, and those are clearly separate baramins, and there's no overlap. Well, boy, it's hard for them to find a group where you don't find the overlap. And in some cases, like the one I discussed in Slam Dunk on the Therapsid case, the one and only baraminology study on that, they deliberately flushed a third of the data down the drain before he did the study. So, boy, if you remove enough, then you can make a blob and a blob that looks kind of separate. But even then, there was a certain amount of overlap that they couldn't get past. So it's just terrible. Stephen Bauman says, Aaron said it's possible that turtles may not be reptiles. Oh, no, they're reptiles. In fact, they're diapsids. I was just studying this very thing over the weekend as a result of stuff that I found this delicious little video by Lyson, who's one of the researchers in this field, and he was talking about the fact that some new fossils and new developmental biology stuff had come up in just the last few years. I think the video was from 2013, that kind of settled a lot about how turtle shells form, that it's formed from expanding, extending, flattening ribs, not by accretions of little shell bits. That was the other competing theory, and that this has now been verified by the various fossil things, and some of the stuff I already had in my bibliography, but quite a lot I didn't. And so I naturally added that into the process on it. Even though there are still spots going on there, in just the last few years, yeah, the understanding of how turtles and turtle shells developed has been clarified enormously. And now that they have can start homing in on more about what was going on in the fossil data, then they can theoretically start ferreting out more and more of the developmental gene cascades that produce those things, particularly the rib flattening and rib expansion. That will help in future retro-engineering turtles. BJ says, ooh, time for James to debate Aaron Raw. I wouldn't say debate, I would say discuss. I think we probably share a heck of a lot of the same data set and field. We might have some quibbly bits on maybe some definitions of things and how you approach accommodationism in educational systems or whatever. But yeah, he does really good videos on systematic taxonomy. They're very clear. His hair's longer than I. I think I'm a bit older than he is. But yeah, I wouldn't say it a debate. I would say a discussion. And I think a free-for-all chit-chat on a bunch of stuff where we would have like an audience of people online in a live chat like this. I think that would be really fun. I think we could have, I'm sure he won't get as annoyed with me. I hope he doesn't get as annoyed with me as he did with Mr. Intelligent Design, that we can actually have some discussions back and forth on things. But I think that could be very, very productive. Yeah, well, Stephen Bauman says he would watch Aaron and RJ. Well, then you go ahead and lob that out there and help arrange it. Steve McCrae or SciStrike or any of those might be able to arrange a venue on it, and whatever be his convenience. I'm pretty well open-ended on times. I can match just about anything unless if it overlaps Evolution Hour or SciStrike's Friday Night Movie. Drink! But other than that, yeah, it's completely at his schedule. I think that'd be rather fun. Aaron was I think he was a guest on Jackson Wheat's thing a bit recently too, and they had a little bit of discussion on that one. So yeah, or Pelagia might even want to do that as kind of a thing and whip up a larger program on that basis. I'm open to anything. Brian Stevens says RJ being self-deprecating when compared with Edgar. I know, a doorknob is on a better scale than poor Edgar. For those of you who don't know who Edgar, Mr. Intelligent Design is, he's an amiable, sweet little guy from the Philippines who has kind of come up. He's a young earth creationist and kind of a flat earther too, which I only discovered when he was talking in his commentaries with Kent Hovind. He had a discussion with Kent Hovind on one of his videos, and even Kent seemed a bit bemused, trying to figure out what was going on with him. But he's just an oddball. He's a one-note Charlie. He thinks he's come up with this fabulously incredible new notion of intelligent design that's absolutely devoid of data, and absolutely useless, and he can't get past his little talking points. And all of the stuff apparently that he's written, and all the stuff he posts are just basically the same stuff trolled over and over and over and over again. So he's hilarious, but he's sweet. He's not temperamental. He's not annoying the way some of the people are, who actually get testy and angry. There are some creationists like that, and there's some evolutionists like that, who can kind of get augured in and not handle things drolly. But yeah, if you look on some of my own channels here, Edgar has put in these little 2 or 3 or 4 cents worth, and I've made a point of commenting on the fact that nobody is taking you seriously, Edgar. Not even creationists take you seriously. You're just not on the field here. Yeah, Brian says that Edgar puts himself into a hole and just digs it deeper. Yeah, he has no clue. Now, he would be in that category of grassroots seat of the pantsers in the anti-evolution movement, and there are millions of them. These are people who kind of gather little fiddly bits here and there that percolate around in their head, and then they have some kind of a grand epiphany. In his case, he was dropping eggs on tissue paper things in a box he made. I mean, this was his experiment, and he's always talking about that one. But functionally, there's very little data involved in his argument, and not even much in the way of intelligent design or creationism stuff. He doesn't connect up with any of their material. I'll give you credit, at least, for both the intelligent design movement and young earth creationism have very extensive data fields in terms of their apologetics, their technical arguments. All of them have at least one or more technical journals that are put out by their groups, that they publish their serious stuff that's got footnotes in. It's hilarious and fun to read. It's not biblical apologetics. They're trying to be sciencey. They're failing miserably at the source level, and that's a different issue, but they're trying. Edgar ain't on that level. He's way below that. And you find there are several people on Twitter that I joust with as well that are in that field, that are essentially making up their own form of creationism. And you find that in the largely Seventh-day Adventist, but it's a little bit outside of it, that tiny little sector of creationism that thinks that dinosaurs are made up, that they're not real. And that's not a creationist position, certainly not an intelligent design position. They're certain that those were real animals. They just disagree about when they lived and whether they were designed or not. But the seat of the pantsers don't really pay attention to their own literature much, and so they can just trope off of something they've heard, and then they can run amok with it. We got Dr. Austin. I'm assuming you're referring to Stephen Austin, not the character from the $6 Million Man. Stephen mentions. Steve Austin is probably his big work. It's about 20 years old now. Is the Grand Canyon, a Monument to Catastrophe, and it's a lightly done, glossy paperback that argues that the flood produced the Grand Canyon, and it's pretty sparsely documented, even for Steve Austin. And in fact, if you look at most of his technical papers, he's not super duper thick on references. By contrast, Andrew Snelling can be just a citation hog. I mean, a typical Snelling paper will have a lot of source citations in it. And of course, in the TIP project, I track all that stuff down because it simultaneously measures their source usage and how they deal with source data, if you can get the primary source full text, which most of the times I can, so that helps. But it's also telling you what they're not paying attention to. And so I don't have to guess at certain items that are simply not discussed in the anti-evolution literature. I'm gradually building up a complete data set so I can physically measure it. Yeah, Steve says he's a shitty geologist. Well, he's a schizoid geologist. Let's put it that way. He can do perfectly fine geology work, and every once in a while he gets published in regular geology journals. I think there was a thing he did with geology just a couple of years or so ago. And it's on usually very minute technical things. And there are a small bunch of typically creationists who continue to have an oar in the water. They can write papers where they're not advancing their creationist views, they meet peer review, they're on some technical point, and they have expertise on it. But the problem is what happens when they then jump over to their creationist apologetics. So this is true of Baumgartner and it's true of Andrew Snelling and all the rest. Less so of Austin. I don't think he's done much in the way of regular science publications in quite some time. He's entirely in the apologetic argument. Then they are switching gears into a very different mode. And you can tell the difference when you start looking at what arguments they're making, and you can figure out, well, now we know why this wouldn't get past muster, because he's running roughshod over a data stream. And that would be called attention to if he tried to get it published in a regular journal. But if he's depending on the kindness of the readers at Answers in Genesis, the Answers in Genesis research journal, I think, is the current one. The Journal of Creation went through several iterations. It was also known as the Creation Ex Nihilo, and so it has kind of multiple names. And then they've also got a journal. They've got a Creation magazine, and they have an Ex Nihilo magazine. So they have a whole bunch of different versions of things, and you might not realize some of the stuff is for popular consumption and some of it is for technical consumption. And if in some ways they've gotten a little bit more precise now in reserving their technical journal and the research journal for their air quotes serious stuff. Takes a while to learn the lay of the land on here. Then we got to go down. Stephen says he also Austin also tried to push that catastrophic plate tectonics crap 5 years ago. Oh, that's still going on. It's not Austin and Net Snelling and Kurt Wise and Baumgartner and Walter Brown. They've all got their little oars in the water on this, and they have to, because they've kind of recognized that a lot of the criticism of old 1960s, 70s creationism, where the world was essentially the one we know now, and there was a terrible flood, and then they picked up where they left off, was untenable. They have to have error at the tallest mountain, and they have to rearrange stuff drastically. So gradually they've kind of absorbed little bits and pieces of things. And if you look at the Answers in Genesis Museum, some of the stuff that's posted online, I have not had the privilege to be able to visit there in Kentucky. Somebody'd have to bloody pay my way, or I'd have to have enough support at tip, hint, that would be feasible to do. But at any rate, I've seen a lot of videos and other things to where I can catch sight of it. And one of the little posters that they have up there at the museum shows the pre-flood world as Rodinia, which is the supercontinent that existed in the Precambrian. And then apparently after the flood, it briefly turned into Pangaea, lickety-split, and then turned into the present continental system. And all this has to happen, in effect, within a few years. So they have really funhouse crazy stuff where plates are moving along to the point where you'd expect people to get whiplash from the continents slamming into each other. And needless to say, I have not read diddly from Andrew Snelling or any of the others where they really kind of come to grips with, can that work? Can that be documented in the fracture zones that you would see at plate boundaries that would show the kinds of crystallization that would occur only in very rapid contexts, and that there are different kinds of things. We know how long it takes some crystals to form, for example, and that's one of the things that you can use to defend the old Earth, even though they'd already worked out the old Earth 200 years ago. But this is just frosting on the cake, that there are many crystals that are physically impossible to form in under like 50,000 years. And the bigger they are, the longer they take to form. And they have to be formed at extreme depths and unusual circumstances. When geologists talk about rapid, it's often the case, well, this one only took 100,000 years or 8,000 years, something like that. You know, that's a really rapid formation. It's still longer than the history of the Earth or the flood geology event that's supposedly only 4,500 years ago. So, Stephen Bauman also says Columbia and Kennerland and the others. I haven't heard of Kennerland, but Columbia, that's the farther back you go into time on these supercontinent cycles, the less you got available to look at. Duh. Remember that there's very little oceanic deposits that date back before the Cretaceous. And that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to find, or was difficult to find, stuff on origin of turtles and ichthyosaurs and a bunch of critters that are occurring during that Triassic period, when we've got very little oceanic deposits to work with, because plate subduction, you know, chews everything up. And so the farther back you go into time, the fewer blips you have on the scope. So in some respects, if you look at geology works on this subject, you'll see the continents are getting smaller and smaller. Well, not necessarily. It's the bits we've got are fewer and fewer things on the scope. Rodinia has been worked out fairly well, and so we actually have a much better notion of that time frame from then all the way down through Pangaea into our zone. But farther back, the Columbia supercontinent, it looks like about 600 million years or so on a supercontinent cycle. And if you do the math, it means that since we can know that plate subduction and continental crust movements and stuff are occurring very early, we've got some signs of that because of the typical kind of crystals and stuff they form. It's not unreasonable to imagine that there were probably a bunch of supercontinents prior to Columbia even. But what's interesting, of course, remember, nothing on the land. You don't start getting things on the land until after the Cambrian. So fungi and algae and stuff probably invaded first, and then the insects went after that, and then the vertebrates, when they were able to crawl up on the land, started following. And so bingo bongo, when the time you're down into the Devonian, it's a busy place. But that means that only one of the supercontinents, Pangaea, was one where it wouldn't have looked like Antarctica on a dull day everywhere. All the land masses would be devoid of life. Oxygen levels would have been relatively low, and so you'd be gasping for breath. And it would be, if you like bleak, Rodinia would have been a fun place to visit, but not many Starbucks there. Yeah, Stephen says Kennerland is a Paleoproterozoic one. Yeah, that's anything before there. It mainly is the fragments of what eventually ends up as the continent systems we know. And the farther back you go in time, the more you got stuff where continents, land masses have rotated around and shifted, and stuff that used to be north is south. More recently, of course, the fabulous example is India, which is currently in the northern hemisphere, parked next to the Himalayas. It's the reason why there's the Himalayas. But back in the Silurian period, it was down in the southern hemisphere, parked next to Antarctica, and would get ice ages going from what seemed to be the south to the north. And because it was going from the pole northwards. But it got flipped out and squished and moved and wandered across the Indian Ocean and finally slammed into Asia. And the reason why we have monsoons and stuff today is because that gigantic mountain range has been pushed up, and the Tibetan Plateau and all of that, which we can measure with our little laser stuff, I think about a ½ an inch a year. That's fairly typical movement for that. And yes, Paradise says, no Starbucks? How about Tim Hortons? Yeah, Paleoproterozoic Horton. It's like having the concession stand at the Gibraltar Falls, you know, during the 100 years or so when there was a colossal waterfall there refilling the Mediterranean Sea. Would have been a spectacular place for souvenir hunting. Unfortunately, the Australopithecines down south in Africa were not terribly concerned about this at the time, so they weren't bothering about it. Idle says they're an amateur mycologist with questionable morals. Oh dear. Rimshot, M-O-R-E-L-S. Oh, Steve points out, yeah, he loves the Paleoproterozoic. Last weekend he was in Ontario, which would be Ontario, Canada, as opposed to Ontario, California, where I used to live, which was named for a bunch of immigrants who came from Ontario, Canada. Duh. Anyway, he was petting a glacial till that was 2.4 billion years old. Yeah, you've got only a few spots on Earth. Typically, you can find little snippets of Precambrian rock most places. Very few. I mean, there's a little tiny snippets of it, I think, here in Washington State and others, but they're few and far between. The ones that really make geologists salivate are larger deposits, like these old Pluton shields and stuff. You find some of that in South Africa. It's one of the reasons why you have diamonds and gold there, is because a lot of this stuff was formed very, very old. Stephen Bauman puts a gun to his head there. There's an Ontario, California. Yeah, I lived, it's down just east of Pomona, which you'll go, duh, what? But there's an auxiliary airport there, I think named for John Wayne. And there used to be a drag racing thing down there. My brother was into that sort of stuff, so he would pay attention to that. It has well water, unusual for that area. You only have to refrigerate it before drinking it. And unlike the other kind of water that they get from the Owens Canal and all that for Los Angeles. At the time, I think it had like about 50,000 people when I was living down there in the 1960s. And yeah, no big deal. I like Spokane better. Anyway, so we're about midway. I think I should probably put up my moment here. And again, as I'm always pointing out how incompetent I am at all of these fiddly bit screen sharings and all that, because I'm new at this, damn it. And there we go. Let me put that in there, close that off, and there we got the RJs, hashtag tip patrons. We got a new one, Yui Firmanik, just yesterday. And so we got Stephen and John and Dyer and Eat and Yui and Mona and Pendrell and Jen and Jody and Staggles and Alex and Totes Real and Paul. I want to thank every one of you who has been helping the project. The Patreon stuff is deliberately key to these shows. I just posted the last few episodes of Evolution Hour up in there on the Patreon site. You can find links to everything at the hashtag tip main site, including links to my books and all the stuff you can download, all those damn PDFs, put them on your computer and draw on them. And you can become a patron there, patreon.com, and then you can also donate direct at gofundme.com. And as an impoverished Social Security liver person who is trying to make a career move midstream and do some work that nobody's ever done before, all the help that you can do to help me keep going at all of this is ever so much appreciated. Well, there's the shameless plug. Everybody write that down. Everybody retweet and tell everybody and post everybody and so forth and so on, because that's how we get kind of going on this. I've gone a lot farther in a short period of time than I thought I would in many respects, except on the financial front. I'm still scraping by on that. But I've gone from not doing YouTubes to doing YouTubes. And I think there's a lot that I still need to learn on stuff. I still got to get a tutorial to upgrade the main tip website to get it organized so I can put search engines up and all that. But I'm afraid to do anything on that without screwing it up. So I've been holding off on that. And still generating enough income to continue up on stuff. There's a lot of stuff to do. The long-term structure of TIP is the idea that it should be a massive, searchable, up-to-date, constantly updated data resource that covers all of the relevant information that you need to know to defend evolution, and all of the creationist claims and people. There's nobody that would be missing. Eventually find some people to continue the work after I'm gone. I'm 65 and can expect to have at least another 30 years in me because I come from a long live family, but eventually I won't be here. So I'd love to have it that it's a permanent thing, not something that doesn't get updated much like Talk Origins tends to be, but something that is a vital going concern that will be the go-to place that everybody can go to where if you need to find out about any subject, you're going to be able to find it and you're going to be up to speed on it. And hopefully by creating a big network of people online in these social media, not a thing that involves a great deal of money, but just people being interested in the things they're interested in. The thing that we can have is that for all practical purposes, no anti-evolutionist can ever poke their head up anywhere without knowledgeable people being able to poke back. Not with insult or anger or, well, you stupid, but with solid information to know tactically what to present, how to present it in such a way that anybody observing this is seeing, oh dear, that creationist ain't doing well on this one. And the evolution person has got all their ducks in a row. That's why I wrote Slam Dunk, because it was a subject that wasn't covered properly, the reptile-mammal transition. Why aren't we using this? Yes, I love birds. I love the whale cases. I love our hominid evolution. I'm happy to chat about them. I can talk about the Cambrian Explosion or even Origin of Life. But don't forget the reptile-mammal transition. Holy smokes. That one's got none of the problems, and it's got 100% failure rate on anti-evolutionists on it. So, why not make use of it more? So I did that. And by the way, if anybody out there knows a good normal publisher who would like to take up the cudgel to do an illustrated second edition of Slam Dunk, let me know. You can contact me at the TIP website and any of the, or on Twitter or any of these other venues, and help me on it, because I'm too far down on the food chain, no PhD, that it's kind of hard to get going on that. And Christine Janis and others have said that the book needs to be illustrated, needs to have pictures. And I didn't have the option to be able to get the rights to all of the kind of charts and page excerpts and stuff that I wanted to have up so that you would be able to see all of this. And if that were done, it would move up to the level of just a ultimate resource where you would be able to see everything you needed, rather than having to go to a link and finding something online where you would now see the chart that should be in the book. So anyway, yes, Paranor says he needs pictures for people like Trump. Oh, pictures don't help him. No, I'm afraid our president only decides the things he wants to be true, and he only pays attention to what he wants to be true. And if it's a right-wing website, it's way more likely, and I'm not a right-wing website, so I'm afraid it's highly unlikely he would pay much attention to me. So, we've got, yeah, Brian says maybe sci-hub.org. I depend very greatly on the fact that I can't do everything myself, and I don't know everything. But somebody may know somebody who knows somebody else who knows somebody else. That's what social networking can do. So spread the word on everything. And I have my own self-interest in wanting everybody on the planet to have a copy of Evolution Slam Dunk. I'd love it for it to be in libraries and other kinds of contexts. And yeah, people help on that. So anyway, see what more we've got going on here. We've got any direct questions on what I've done so far on the matter of the idea that any science paper that is touching on an unsolved issue in anti-evolutionism, a place where they really don't want to think about it, is potentially a beautiful thing to lob at somebody. And any area of expertise, like your mycologist there in the live chat, or any other specialty, if you have geology or astrophysics, there's going to be something you are really interested in that you can latch on to a primary source work that bumps into something that anti-evolutionists say can't happen. And you can use that as a pry bar in an area of your own expertise to hit back up on. Because it's clearly the case I've seen that people are much more confident in engaging people in areas they know a lot about. And if you're kind of just trying to wave Neil deGrasse Tyson from afar at them, it isn't nearly as effective on the bystanders who are observing the exchange. I think the goal of all discussion frames that I'm involved in, I'm not there to persuade them that they're wrong, the creationists. No, they're not. That's not going to happen. No, I want observers who might be fence straddlers, who might be open-minded, that have taken this seriously, might go, one side is really doing well and the other one isn't. And that may prod them to start doing their own investigation. And once they start doing that and use rigorous methods to do it, I say, bye, enjoy yourself, because you're going to have fun. You're going to learn stuff. You won't be depending on me to tell you what it is. You're going to be building your own argument frame and coming to understand the subject on your own. I've seen a lot of people, the people I admire a great deal in this area are ones that didn't necessarily start out. I wasn't an evolutionist when I started out on this, but I got off on the dinosaurs and other subjects and gradually applied the good method I'd been taught in college, and the rest is what you see now. Okay, Pheno 3000 is asking, did you see that report about the observed speciation in the Galapagos Islands? There's been quite a lot on that in relation to, of course, the finches. That's ongoing. And of course, anti-evolutionists say there's still finches, so it's not really evolution. There was just a new paper out on whether or not a particular bird species had died out or not in one of the islands in the Caribbean. And there's a debate about whether or not they were in fact that species or not. So that tends on to the issue of how that fuzzy zone on how you identify a species in a fossil context. But the nice thing about the Galapagos finches or any of these other areas is that you've got not only the physical morphology to look at, but you've also got the genetics and potentially the fossil record to connect up on. I alluded to a little bit of the Galapagos case in Slam Dunk, and to some extent in I think I tipped 1.4, something like that. I got an index in there of the new modules on the bird kinds, and how Susan Leitner decided there was a whole single kind for all the finches. And that means 1,200 species. And it means functionally she's conceding that all the Galapagos finches are in fact derived from previous forms by natural evolution. I don't think she quite realizes, or a lot of creationists realize, you know, the ground they're giving away example by example by example. But anyway, yeah, Fino, put that report up, or a paper discussion. I don't think you, maybe I can give you, let me give you power here to, whoops, bloody hell. Yeah. I reach over to something, and we will add Fino as a moderator, so you can put a direct link up there if you want to put a bit on there, and I'll check to see what that is. Hopefully, it'll already be in my reference bibliography. But one of the things that I've discovered so well in doing these things, both the videos and interactions on Twitter, as I gradually build up a network of contacts, is, wow, there's so much science out there that I didn't have immediate access to, that if you follow or interact with the people who are following the work or doing the work, bingo, you're suddenly connected up with cutting-edge papers. I also sweep back through, when I'm putting new material into the bibliography, I'm also checking older material, and I can tell whether or not I have it full text or not. And so I'll often go through and see, well, maybe it's gotten to be available full text since. And so there was this old paper from a journal that usually isn't accessible. It's on the origins of life and evolution of the biospheres. It's gone through a couple different names over the various years. But most of those, it's not an open access journal, and very few of the people who publish in it tend to post their papers. So it's a tough one to get. But this one, by happenstance, had been posted by one of the authors up there. So bingo, I got it. But because it was an older paper, I then did a text search on it to find out what work has been done since, and it turned out there was a lot of stuff. It was on this particular enzyme that apparently can act as a bridge between an RNA pre-LUCA world and protein systems. And that looked kind of interesting. And so it turns out there's been actually quite a lot of work that's been done subsequent on that, and kind of ferret out more of the interconnection bridges. And so I had about half a dozen different technical papers that I was just adding in, which is one of the reasons I was a little bit late getting my act together here and waiting for the laundry to get done. So I thought being dressed was a good idea for the show, so I had to finish all of that stuff off. Oh, okay, there we go. So I will just open that link in a new tab so I can see what the heck is going on that. Thank you, Brian. Referring to, we're in the live look at the screen while he looks at another screen mode. Whoops, it isn't popping up. It looks like the page doesn't exist. So, involving a new species in real time in 2 generations. I'll have to look at that. They may have changed the URL address on that, which often happens on things that we lop onto on there. Reason why, if you look in my bibliography, I make it a point not to use the kind of standard URLs in most of the citations that are internet, because if you find 9 chances to a hole in a donut, you try clicking on one of those nowadays, they won't work. That there's way too many options. It isn't that the information wasn't there to begin with, or that it isn't still there somewhere. It's just not at that URL, and you're screwed. So I do everything from the full title of the heading and the main website I got it from and when I got it from. And in some cases, if I do follow-up on it, sometimes there are cases where things no longer exist because the website's gone and they've changed that. Ah, we have a visitor. Average has jumped in. I see a face. Unmute yourself and say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, indeed. Let me turn this off because I've got a little bit back noise on here. Yes, introduce yourself.
My name is Jesse.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm a
how did
former
you
Jehovah's
come?
Witness.
Oh, okay. What did you want to bring up or discuss or deal with?
Yeah, I found your link on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody else could join also.
Well, we're here at the moment. Have you been following the show for the last 45 minutes?
No, no, just a minute ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I do here at Evolution Hour is discussing a lot of evolution science concepts and issues, and also, because this is part of my major area of research, discussing anti-evolutionism, creationism, and the Jehovah's Witness often would fall into that. They've done quite a lot on that doctrinally, so I would suppose that as a Jehovah's Witness, you would not be.
I think they believe in adaptation. I'm not sure.
Well, adaptation is kind of a buzzword. The issue is, do you believe that everything is related by natural branching common descent? Is.
So I'm not a fan of evolution. I actually call it evolution. You know,
Mm-hmm.
EVIL.
Oh, yeah, yeah. How much do you know about it?
Not much. I've never studied it. It doesn't interest me. It's kind of like flat Earth. It's just a waste of time.
Well, unlike flat Earth, evolution actually is true, and in fact, you've already been using stuff that's evolved. The jaw you're using and the ears you're hearing with. There's a long evolutionary heritage on how those got to be the way they are, and it's an absolutely wonderful story. And the science is so spectacular, and also has the advantage that everybody can get at it. It's most of the science technical work is available free online these days. So nothing prevents anybody from studying it. Yeah, do
Oh
you have a
yes,
comment?
yes, I do believe that you know, the dogs, they all came from the same parents. You know, they all evolved into what they are now.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not related to no dogs or monkeys or anything like that.
Oh, well, everything is related by common descent. It depends on how elements are. Our hominid line, we can trace back. If you wanted to look at where our common ancestor is with dogs, you've got to go way back, about 100 million years or so, down to the deep roots of placentals that are occurring in the late Cretaceous period. By the way, just to be clear on here, how old do you think the Earth is?
No, well, the Earth is millions and billions of years old, but we on
Okay.
the Earth, human beings have only been on the Earth for about 7,000 years.
Oh, well, that's false. No, actually, we've been around for well over 200,000 years, and well, that's pretty well settled in the science. So you'll have to expand your time frame there to fill in a little bit more of that. And of course, before our own species, you have those little squishy groups that are leading into the Homo erectus bunch, and that contends back another a couple million years. Homo erectus, our precursor species, was the ones that spread all over the place. And then farther back, you've got the deep roots of our genus, Homo habilis and all the rest. That's pushing us back about 4 million years. And then farther back into the Australopithecines and farther back into various bipedal hominids that are knocking around. And then you got to go back, 5, 10 million years to get into the groups that are then branching between ours and chimpanzees and the gorillas and the others that are in the higher primates in Africa. So, yeah, I think you'll need to flesh out a little bit more of your map of time there to get up to speed.
I do believe life started in the ocean.
Yeah, of course, that's been quite a long time ago, 4 billion years, and it's spent all of its time doing that for the next couple billion years before we start seeing the first land critters popping up, which I was just discussing about earlier in the show that until you get down to about the Devonian period, that's when you're starting to see big movements of bacteria. They've been probably on the land for quite some time, but it also had to affect the amount of oxygen that was in the atmosphere. That took a while to raise up because that's coming from cyanobacteria. They didn't even show up until about 2.5 billion years ago.
Yeah, I was hoping you were a Christian. I always like to debate Christians.
Oh, no, I was never religious, from a non-religious family, although there were background in Mormons and various others in the bunch. But yeah, that was baggage I never had to worry about in my family. Why do you find discussing things with Christians more interesting than non?
Well, they could actually be helped. You could actually wake them up to things they don't know.
Well, I think you might find that there are an awful lot of people woke up or can be waken up, and I might be saying the same about you.
Well, I think the human race is like they call it the Homo sapiens, don't they?
That's
We're
the old
violent.
term from Linnaeus back in the 17th century, who worked out a lot of taxonomy. He was Christian, by the way, so I mean, this is not an evolutionary concept, and we've kind of stuck with the binomial classification system that he worked out, which can make troubles in dealing with squishy things because that system of classification doesn't allow for almosts, which is what you get into inevitably in an evolutionary context where something is not quite this, not quite that, and eventually it's something where, oh yes, it's one of those.
Well, I think we're in the dark ages. Sooner or later, humans are going to get smarter.
No, we're
And
about as smart as we are likely to get, and it's smart enough. We're the same species as Leonardo da Vinci and Stephen Hawking and other extraordinarily talented people. It's not something compared to actually times when things were really, really bleak. No, we're living in potentially a spectacular golden age if people aren't excessively dumb and drop the ball. But we have access to information on a scale that is unprecedented. I have literally at my fingertips the creativity of every human being that's ever been there, that's ever had stuff preserved. So here I am, a working class schlub who you can see behind me the CDs that I'd collected over years and years and years. I can literally pick off and put on a player that I would never have had an opportunity to even know about, let alone hear, if I were living 100 years ago. So we live in a fabulous time for so much.
how intelligent can humans be if they deny their maker?
Well, you're assuming that your maker is the one that they're denying. Remember, you're an atheist regarding every one of the gods you don't believe in. And whatever religion you have, you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness, a minority subgroup of Christianity. Even today, most people on earth aren't Christians and have never been Christians. Be the case that there will be one religion that is the majority of the planet. I'm not necessarily thinking that's a very good idea. But so the more people understand that there are a lot of different ways that people think in these other contexts, and they're just as certain of their belief as you are of yours, maybe you need to pay attention to looking at how you come to believe what you do and cut more people a little bit of slack about how they have done their beliefs.
That little cult of the Jehovah's Witnesses teaches half of the world's truth.
Well, if they've managed to miss evolution, they've already slopped off the field on that one.
Do you not understand evolution as a theory? It has not been proven.
No, it is. It's a science theory, like gravity and cell theory and quantum theory. Science theories. Have you never been told the difference between a science theory and the common term theory?
No, my
The
scientist
difference?
in school never taught me anything.
Well, then there's a problem with their schools. But a science theory is the top of the food chain in science. What you have are observations, and eventually people start working out hypotheses in science about what explains them. And then finally, you start having big arching, overarching conceptual structures that are science theories that explain all that data set. And because they tend to be predictive and successful and work, then they gradually become the accepted model. That's what it is with evolutionary theory, because it's the only player in town that explains this. The same thing with quantum theory. We're using stuff, computers that have integrated circuits chips that do what they do because quantum theory explains how solid state physics works. And this was worked out over 100 years ago in the early 20th century. It's called a theory because it's a science theory. It's not science theories aren't guesses. They're not vague notions. They're not speculation. And I've done already some evolution hours earlier on the fact that evolution has moved way beyond the just vague speculation mode to experimentation. We now have paleogenomics, where you can retro-engineer biological systems. You can work out what ancient proteins look like and test them out to see what they did, to find out that they're doing intermediate functions exactly as you would expect from an evolutionary point of view. We can retro-engineer ancient physical skull systems. They've done that with birds related to dinosaurs. They've done that with rib systems with the reptile-mammal transition. They've done that with mammal teeth going back 100 million years or more, completely retro-engineering the gene structures that produce forms that are now extinct. So we're way beyond the level of oh, it hasn't been proven yet. No, I'm afraid it has. And there's all this information out there that's there for the looking. If you don't look at it because it doesn't interest you, fine. It isn't there. Don't say that no, evolution isn't proven when you haven't tried to look to see what the proof is. And by the way, what would prove it to you?
I wish you were right, because the God that I follow is an evil God.
What?
Yeah, the God that I follow is a bad guy.
Well, then that's is such a God worthy of worship? By the way, does this God have a name?
Jehovah.
Okay, and how did you come by this name? Did you have a chit chat with this Jehovah, or did you get it from somebody else's book that told you what it was?
No, that's what they call the biblical God.
But secondarily, you didn't actually have a personal revelation on that. Okay.
No, I don't
But
have
anyway,
revelations.
why would you worship an evil God?
I have no choice. I accept reality for what it is.
Well, of course you have a choice. Don't you have enough
I tried
gumption to
being an
say,
atheist.
listen, this God is not a particularly nice God, and you may be powerful, but I'm not going to pretend that you're worthy of worship. Why don't you have any morals?
Yeah, I say that all the time. That's why I'm an atheist. I believe God is evil.
Well, um, if that floats your boat, but try not to make a nuisance on it. Anyway, on the evolution front, the data's out there. It's full science. There's vast tens of thousands of scientists doing stuff, and it's open access where you can follow, look over their shoulder by reading their works and see how all of that has been expanded. And in many respects, our lives depend on it. Knowing how parasites affect things in terms of disease vectors, to know how crops are going to withstand climate change. All of these things are ones that are knee-deep in natural branching evolution, and to find out how the biology has worked over a long period of time and what systems functions are there. And the only people in town that are doing that work and figuring it all out are the evolutionists, to just contribute diddly here.
What do you think is the next step in evolution?
Oh, that's unpredictable. Remember, evolution does not say that there are steps. There have been relatively few big things in evolution. One was the first origin of life, which is prebiotic. And then the next bits are development of multicellularity, happened quite a long time ago, and happens in a variety of different ways. That seems to be fairly inevitable. Beyond that is the idea of self-aware intelligence, which we're not probably unique there. I suspect that there's a lot of cetaceans and others that have some great depths there, but they're very non-human intelligence, so it's hard for us to have a chit-chat with us. But that I can't necessarily think that there's anything beyond that. We're already altering our own adaptive landscape. The quality of my eyeballs are irrelevant. They create technology so that I can walk around without bumping into things. And we're probably doing a lot of that ourselves. Next step of evolution is like saying, what's the next step in mountain formation? There will be new mountains. There will be mountains worn away. There will be continents moving. Things will look different, not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, not necessarily better, not necessarily worse. It'll just be different. I'd like to hope that we're intelligent and clever enough to not be one of the extinct crowd. Typically, it takes millions of years for the average species to finally peter out. Whether or not we can do beyond that, who knows? We're intelligent, but that's way beyond the time frame either one of us are involved with. We're talking millions of years there.
Do you believe aliens are going to take over this planet?
No, none are close enough. You realize how big space is? And the odds are of any, and we're also very likely to be one of the oldest intelligent life forms in the universe. It takes a long time to build a solar system with planets around it. and also ones that have liquid water oceans. Those are much rarer. And so the kinds of situations that we're finding here, even with life on it, then it took billions of years to get up to the point where we can do things with opposable thumbs and make tools and blow ourselves up. Well, it's very likely that that same long process would apply anywhere else. We know there can't possibly be any intelligent life forms that are, say, 10 billion years old, because there were no planetary systems with heavy elements back then. So we're probably in a good position of being one of the older ones around. Now, the question is how close? It doesn't do diddly squat if you can't travel faster than light, and the nearest intelligent life form is 100,000 light years away. You're not going to chat. It takes too far to get there. So it all depends on whether or not you can travel faster than light. Other issue is, why would we presume that other intelligent life forms are any better or worse than we are? They probably have also had to figure out how to avoid blowing each other up. You might hypothesize for science fiction purposes the Borg or something vicious like that, but these are also kind of things that are exteriorizing our old dreams and fears. Terrified at the prospect of some alien swooping in? No.
Do you believe Jesus was a real person?
Yeah.
Did he walk the earth?
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I'm very much a historically minded person, that I think there was a Homer who wrote the Iliad. How much of every single jot and tittle is that? We don't know, because we don't have recordings or primary sources on the subject, but it would surprise me if not. And the same thing with Jesus. I know there are a lot of atheists who argue that Jesus was purely mythological, but I think the time frame and the structure, if you look at the spread of things and the role of people like Paul and others and fit the chronology in, that it for me would be implausible for a Jesus person. Now, what got turned into Jesus the God, that is a historical process, and there we can see that that takes a while to kick in, and then becomes eventually the official version once it became the Church of the Roman Empire. But there were lots of different Christianities before that took place, and the only reason why you have the version you do, long historical process of editing and focusing that leads to that. But if there's two people, Richard Carrier would be somebody who would say Jesus was mythical, and Bart Ehrman, who did a wonderful lecture here in Spokane just a few months ago, very good, would say, no, there was a real Jesus person, but that doesn't necessarily mean the mythical Jesus is all correct. I'm much more on the Ehrman position than the Carrier one.
Yeah, there's an author out there by the name of Dan Barker. I believe he's an atheist. He quotes a lot of scripture.
Yeah, ex-preacher. Yeah, ex-preacher. I met him.
Oh, I didn't know he was a
Could speak in
preacher.
tongues.
Yeah, he still does sermons, but he does it for the atheist.
That's snark. But anyway, he came from one of the evangelical sects where he spoke in tongues, and I've actually asked him several times he should go into an MRI and do that, because there's really not been enough science work to figure out what's going on.
Wait a minute. You called his office like I did, or what? You spoken to the man?
What? Yes. He's lectured here. He visited our secular group and did a nice speech for us last year, I think, a year or two ago, maybe.
Yeah, I challenged him to a public debate, but
so, yeah.
he wasn't interested. Yeah, I called his office and left him a voicemail about if he wants to debate me, but he only debates the guys that have channels or something.
Yeah, well, that's a situation that often pops up. That doesn't surprise me. When you have a very busy schedule and all of that, you pick your situations carefully. But anyway, yes, I've bumped into him several times. We've had little chit-chats back and forth, and I've suggested that he do MRIs on the glossalia issue, because it's not entirely clear what's going on in the head when people speak in tongues. Is there still the grammatical system kicking in, and yet it's just coming out as gibberish? Or is it actually now disconnected from the grammatical system, and so it's genuinely gibberish at the verbal construction level?
My sister
And that
speaks in
hasn't been
tongues
resolved yet.
when she prays over me, but I think she's just trying to express herself. My sister speaks in tongues
That
when
may be
she
the case.
prays.
Early on the research on that. Anyway, we're past the end of our evolution hour, and So we'll be shutting down here for the evening. And thank you for joining in, Jesse. And
Yeah, I'm gonna leave and go listen to the show again, where I spoke.
and put some comments in and so forth and so on.
Yes, thank you for having me. Bye.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we're now shutting down here. And thank for everybody for showing up on the show. This was kind of a rush job for me because I just came back from Seattle, as I said, and from the holidays, and I kind of was literally hadn't got everything organized until about a half hour beforehand. So, and we will thank Jesse for interesting questions and hopefully start investigating things, or maybe not. That's the way things go. Okay.